Jeremy Bentham created what is sometimes called the Felicific Calculus, and sometimes the Hedonic Calculus, as a method for measuring the pleasure and pain produced by our actions, so that when we are deciding which action to pursue, we can measure the pain and pleasure produced by every alternative action, and then we can work out which action would maximize pleasure. The Felicific Calculus is made up of 7 components that we must measure, and they are intensity, duration, certainty or uncertainty, nearness or remoteness, fecundity, purity, and extent. So every action has some intensity to it, and by intensity we just mean how pleasurable the pleasure is or how painful the pain is. An itchy nose is less painful and therefore less intense than breaking your leg. You might find that waking up in the morning, remembering it's a Saturday, and then turning your pillow over to the nice cool side while snuggling down into your duvet to be a more intense pleasure than chewing gum. Pleasures and pains also have duration, and that just means how long they go on for. So some pleasures and pains are really short, some are longer. You might really like football, and so therefore watching an exciting football match might provide you with 90 minutes of pleasure. Whereas eating a chocolate bar might only provide you with a few minutes of pleasure, depending on how quickly you scoff it down, I suppose. Bentham assumed that intensity and duration should be given equal weight, but we may question this assumption. We might find that some short, intense pleasures we could rate higher than longer, less intense pleasures, even if those longer pleasures ultimately provided a higher quantity. So that is something we could question about Bentham's assumption. Let's move on to certainty or uncertainty. So by certainty, we just mean how likely it is, right? How certain it is that the pleasure or pain will arise as a result of our action. Sometimes we do something where the pleasure is not guaranteed. So for example, playing the lottery. For sure, if you won the lottery, that could give you, a lot of pleasure. But the chances of winning the lottery is very, very small. It's very uncertain. And so that would score very low on this measure of the Hedonic calculus. Nearness or remoteness. I always see this one written differently. So instead of nearness, sometimes you will see it said as proximity, or even more fancy word, propinquity. They all mean the same thing, that is, sometimes we perform an action because the pleasure is felt immediately, right? It's near. It's a pleasure that is close in proximity. But sometimes we do something for a reward that we'll receive further down the line. An example might be working out or fitness. So it might not be an immediate reward, but in the future you might be stronger or fitter or have nicer abs. And achieving that goal may give you a lot of pleasure. So that would be a remote pleasure. Supposedly, we're meant to prefer closer, more immediate pleasures than remote ones. Fecundity. Fecundity is the chance an act has of being followed by sensations of the same kind. Something that is fecund is something that is capable of producing more of itself. It's fruitful. So this is a pleasurable action that is fecund is an action that produces even more pleasure, and a painful action that is fecund is an action that produces even more pain. So, for example, a fecund pleasurable action might be you join a club to practice your hobby, and that alone is a pleasurable action for you. But while there, you meet other people, they have a similar interest, and you make more friends. So, you've created, another pleasurable experience. A fecund painful action might be you're nasty to someone, and as a result, you fall out. Now, you don't like each other. That is a painful experience, and then they tell other people about how nasty you are. Now other people don't like you, and there's more arguments with other people, so more painful experiences are created as a result. Purity is the chance of an action not being followed by sensations of the opposite kind. So basically what Bentham is saying here is a pure pleasure is a pleasure that isn't followed by pains, and a pure pain is a pain that isn't followed by pleasures. Finally, extent. Here we are measuring how much the pleasure or pain that results from our actions affect other people. Or we could say how far it extends to other people. So actions that produce lots of pleasure in lots of others are better than pleasures that only affect a few people. And pains with less extent are obviously, better than pains with great extent. Now, how do we actually use the Felicific Calculus? Well, first, you have to consider all the people that your action will affect. Calculate how much pleasure each of those people will receive as a result of your action, and then calculate how much pain each of those people will receive as a result of your action. Then you can work out for each person how much their utility is going to increase or decrease, right? Because some people may have an increase of pleasure overall, or they may have an increase of pain overall as a result of your action. Then you can add all of these together to get an overall score of utility for your action. Great! Well, now you have to do that for again and again for all alternative actions that you could do instead in order to figure out which one produces the most utility, so which one maximizes pleasure the most. It has often been said that applying the Felicific Calculus is impractical. I can see why. But Bentham himself anticipates this criticism. He says, this is a quote from an introduction to the Principles of Morals and Legislation, first published in 1789. And what he says here is, it is not to be expected that this process should be strictly pursued previously to every moral judgment. It may, however, be always kept in view. And as near as the process actually pursued on these occasions approaches to it, so near will such process approach to the character of an exact one. So, what we're saying here is, we are not morally obligated to utilise the Felicific Calculus for every moral judgment, but we should use it where and when we can. Bentham presents it as a model of an ideal calculation, but recognises that we cannot live up to this ideal every time. So, while there are smaller decisions in our lives in which using the Felicific Calculus is probably inappropriate, so such as, I could wonder, will it maximise utility to lend my pen to a friend who has lost his, even though I know that it's possible that he will not give it back, or if he does give it back, he might chew the end. Now, in situations like that, maybe the Felicific Calculus is maybe a bit over the top, but for more serious considerations that already take a lot of time to think and consider, things like abortion or euthanasia, the Felicific Calculus is more appropriate and could be used. And a lot of what Bentham is talking about in Introduction to the Principles of Morals and Legislation is about legislation. It's about governance and creating laws and things like that, which already require a big lot of time to think about. So his method is certainly more appropriate to that. But certainly in more serious ethical dilemmas that we find ourselves in, maybe it's not too impractical. Sometimes, when it's beneficial to make a decision quickly, making a quick decision may create more pleasure than delaying your decision because you're using the Felicific Calculus to work out what to do, right? So it isn't intended to be something you should use all the time, but in ideal circumstances you should. So think of a quick example, you can see an accident is going to happen, like, I don't know, a car is stuck on the track, a train could come at any time, there's someone in the car. Here, delaying acting in order to think of, to calculate what is the right thing to do, and weighing, it's a risk to me if I go and try and save them, if a train comes on it could get me to, and trying to weigh all these things is actually you're wasting precious seconds here. So sometimes the action that maximizes utility might actually be one that doesn't even use the Felicific Calculus, right? You might just need to be getting a move on. A quick decision is the better decision. There are some cases like that, so that's an interesting thing. So finally, you might be concerned as to the best way to remember all 7 components, say from an exam or an essay, and you might be best of thinking your own mnemonic here, but I thought of idiots don't cuddle nice friendly people ever, right? Idiots don't cuddle nice friendly people ever. Intensity, duration, certainty, nearness, fecundity, purity, and extent. You might find it useful, although you probably won't, that Bentham thought up a poem in order to help people remember his calculus. I feel like that's a real 18th century thing to do. And it goes like this. Intense, long, certain, speedy, fruitful, pure, such marks in pleasures and in pains endure. Such pleasures seek, if private be thy end, If it be public, wide let them extend. Such pains avoid, whichever be thy view. If pains must come, let them extend to a few.